He fastened to his bumper when he drove forward. The front of the deposit box was supposed to drop off. Instead, his bumper did. On it was his license plate. The police didn't need another clue to make an arrest. Plugging the law. Grant Podashski was given a ticket in 1985 for parking too close to a fire hydrant in front of his home in Edmonton, Canada. Podashski has the policeman to take a closer look. The hydrant was painted red, white, and blue instead of regular Edmonton yellow, and it had chains attaching the caps. Clearly the hydrant wasn't a real hydrant. It was a lawn ornament and belonged to Podashski. The policeman looked and agreed it wasn't your average fire hydrant. But the law was the law. He told Podashski to pay the ticket and sped off. Podashski won the case by staggering into court with some pretty heavy evidence. A 355-kilogram hydrant. Escape hitch. A convict named Barry Crosby succeeded in scaling the wall of England's Stamford Hills prison in '95. But it wasn't his lucky night. The car he flagged down for his getaway was driven by an off-duty police officer, Sergeant Peter Holloway. As soon as he stepped into the car, I knew he was a prisoner, Holloway said. I said jokingly, "I bet you've just jumped over the wall." And to my amazement, he had admitted he had. He didn't know I was a policeman. The sergeant proved his identity by driving the escapee to the local police station. The engine died. A stolen 1980 two-door Pontiac went underground at the Crown Hill Cemetery in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Felix Gonzalez, a worker at the cemetery, was walking his dogs in 1984 when he saw a bumper sticking out of the ground. Police said the thieves used the cemetery's heavy machinery to dig a hole and bury the car. The robbers without wheels took off on foot. They were caught inside an hour. What's in a name? Confederators of cars titled sealed their own doom in California. Police had no trouble in spotting the phony titles and rounded up a dozen suspects in 1982. The counterfeiters, real dum-dums, misspelled the Great Seal of California. The fake titles read Great Seat of California. Picking his customers. Willie Steinberg, a garbage owner in Staten Island, New York, mastered the law of supply and demanded in 1929 through imposter use of an ice pick. He created a demand for his tire repair services. He was stabbing tires when patrolman Edward W. Brown arrested him. Automobile owners in the neighborhood had been complaining for 6 months about the extraordinary wear and tear on their tires. Chapter 6. Faster, Faster, Faster. Tender is the night. The most thrilling of the early European road races was the Italian Mille Miglia, or 1,000-mile race. It was run over roads open to ordinary traffic. The driver never knew what to expect around the next hairpin turn. An old farm cart, a cow, or a donkey, as dangerous as the mountain roads were by day, they became death lanes in the dark. Yet in 1930, Terzone Nervaler stole victory by a trick that borderlined on madness. He switched off his headlights. Night had fallen and the last part of the race, the sprint to the finish in Brescia, Nervala, behind the wheel of an Alfa Romeo, was in second place. He trailed Archil Varisi, who drove a bigger and faster Maserati. In his desperation to win, Nuvolari flicked off his lights. His car blended in with the darkness. Vasilati glanced back, believing, as Nirvana wished him to, that his rivals were so far behind him that he couldn't see their headlights. He eased off. Nirvana swiftly gained on the unsuspecting Varsarati. 2 miles from the finish, he turned on his lights, shot into the lead, and won. How to pedal your car. French automaker Armand Pigot had a bright idea to promote his cars. He entered one of them in the 1891 Paris to Brest race, an event for bicycles. His car completed the race at about a speed about 10 miles per hour. He finished dead last, soundly outclassed by old-fashioned leg power. Pergot was heel-clicking, happy nonetheless. His car had made the first real long-distance automobile trip. No one had given the newfangled contraption a chance to cover the distance in one piece. Fast, it wasn't. Reliable, it was. The news boosted sales more than even Pigot had hoped. Too close for comfort. The feature race packed Moncrief Park at racetrack in Jacksonville, Florida in 1910. The field was mixed. 1 man, 1 horse, 1 mule, and 1 automobile. The man had to race 550 yards, the mule 990 yards, the horse 1,320 yards, and the automobile 1 1/8 miles. Few in the standing room only crowd actually favored the latest scream, the automobile. Most rooted for the man, and a few pulled for the mule. In the end, the horse drew the loudest cheers by winning. The man, Walter Williams, complained bitterly. He, not the mule, should have been awarded second place. 50 yards from the finish line, old long years had forced him to dive under the rail to avoid being trampled. His claim was not allowed. The youngest entry, the automobile, which had brought out the crowd, trailed throughout the race. Will overhead won't. The most unusual winner of the Annapolis 500 never drove in the world-famous auto race. Fact is, he never lived. Nonetheless, one newspaper hailed his victory in 1933. The people of Walsenburg, a coal mining town in Colorado, chattered with excitement over the story in their daily newspaper. The World Independent, it announced that Will Overhead, an unknown, had won the 500. The rest of America's newspapers printed the truth. Louis Meyer had finished in first place, capturing the second of his 3 Indy victories. Who, then, was this mysterious Will Overheard? Answer: the child of the newspaper slang. In the 1930s, a newspaper could make a special request for a story from the Associated Press, the news gathering service. The AP commonly sent the story by telegraph. The slang term for this procedure was overhead. For example, a newspaper might put in a request such as, "Kindly send us story on Bishop's arrival tonight." The AP would reply, "Okay, we'll overhead Bishop." The 1930 Indianapolis race was half completed when the editor of the World Independent received his last telephoned report of the day. He telegraphed the AP to rush him a story on the winter as soon as the race was over. The AP wired back, I will overhead 500 winner," meaning it would do as requested. The editor, a newcomer and as green as grass, thought that AP was giving him the name of the winner. The Memorial Day edition reached front porches with the banner headline, "Overhead wins Annapolis race." Will Overhead had not been mentioned in the telephoned accounts from the Speedway, which covered the first 250 miles, so it was necessary to mention in the story's lead that he came from behind in the last half of the race to win. The editor was waiting for his big story, meant Indy 500, and it was getting close to his deadline. The George Zanin who set the famous headline in type, "We were going to beat everybody on the story. They beat everyone." Alas, Will Overhead did not. Greatest show on earth. The first official motor vehicle race in which any contestant finished was held in Chicago, 1895. The winner was Frank Duryea in Duryea Motor Wagon. He averaged a little better than 7 miles per hour over a 55-mile course. The automobile was still considered such an oddity that the following day a Dury motor wagon was put on display by the Birmingham and Bailey Circus. It was pictured in the forefront of posters and exhibited as a freak. Crowds flocked to the marvel at this carriage driven over the common highways without the aid of horses or other draft animals. Circus ballyhoo men called it beyond a doubt that the most ingenious mechanism ever put into practical use. For once, they didn't exaggerate. Stretching a point. Disappointment, success, danger, and humor surrounded racing drivers. For George Robinson, add the word hospital. Robinson had a turn for finishing a race on a stretcher. Twice he had to be carried off the course of the Vanderbilt Cup, the major event of early American auto racing. In 1908, Robertson, then 23, finally won the race and the cup. He drove for 4 hours and 48 minutes, covered 258.06 miles, survived a final lap blowout, and walked away without a scratch. That night he drove into Manhattan for a celebration dinner with a friend. Getting out of the car, he stepped on a loose manhole cover and broke his ankle. Back to the hospital. Indy first place. The Annapolis 500 was produced more than its share of oddities. The second Indy run in 1912 was the oddest of them all. Further, some records set in 1912 still stand, and the two of them probably won't ever be broken. The race seemed to run away for Ralph de Palma. He charged to the front during the third lap. After 190 miles, he had stretched his lead to more than 11 minutes. There we go. Then 3 laps from the finish, his German-made Mercedes threw a piston. His pace slowed from 80 miles per hour to below 30. The sputtering engine died in the backstretch with less than 2 laps to go. De Palma and his Australian mechanic completed the lap by getting out and pushing. The effort was too much. They sagged against the car, exhausted, 1 lap short of 500 miles. Nothing in the rules mentioned a time limit for the race, not preventing De Palma and his mechanic from taking a rest before heroically shoving the car around the final lap. There were 12 prizes and only 10 cars remained in the race, but the weary, disappointed driver and mechanic were too spent to push another lap, 2.5 miles, for a 10th place of 1,300. They called it a day. Joe Dawson, driving a national, won the race and $20,000. He set an Indy record that still stands. The winner who led the race for the fewest numbers of laps, too. De Palma's 196 laps in the lead remained the most for any non-winner. Because of new rules, his feat of pushing his car can never be changed. There was more. Ralph Munford, victor of the 1911 Vanderbilt Cup race, clung to last place, miles and miles behind everyone else. 9 cars had finished when he drove into the pits. His 6-cylinder Knox, plagued by clutch problems, was the only car still running. As Milford munched fried chicken, he was told that if he wanted the money for 10th place, he had to complete the 500 miles. He climbed back into the Knox and resumed the grind. Around and around the winding oval course, Munford nursed the Knox like a man atop 4 loose wheels. Dawson had won in 6 hours and 21 minutes, averaging 78.72 miles per hour. Mumford stood an hour and a half longer as he poked toward everlasting fame. His time of 8 hours and 53 minutes represents a speed of 56.29 miles per hour, the slowest ever for the Indy 500. Frenchman's Folly. From the beginning, racing drivers ved against one another in a brotherhood of sportsmanship. An exception was the hot-headed Frenchman Victor Hemery. In 1906, the best cars on Earth assembled on the sands of the Ormond Beach, Florida, for an assault upon the world speed records. Hemery was there with a big, powerful Daracru. There too was a sleek Rocket, the Stanley steam car driven by Fred Merritt. Low and streamlined Rocket was a far cry from the boiler and the stack mounted on wheels of earlier days. Like any good steamer, it had particularly unlimited power and speed. Hemery looked over Rocket with growing concern. It didn't take long to make up its mind. He must get rid of this dangerous rival in the quickest, simplest manner. As the cars lined up for a heat of the Deward Cup, the most prized event of the meet, Henry drove the Dracru close to the steamer. He revved his 200 horsepower V8 engine. Flames flew from the Dracru's open exhaust stacks, blasting the wood and canvas body of Rocket. The officials threatened to throw Henry out of the meet. He cursed them in French, a language the Americans didn't understand. Eventually, he was disqualified for refusing to return a heat. The Dracru Company cabled the wild Frenchman that he was fired. Fred Marat and Rocket survived the blast that day and won the Drouard Cup. 3 days later, Marat took the steamer back to the beach and went after the 1-mile record. Although he approached the starting line rather slowly, he had the steamer hissing between the markers. Man and machine hurled along the short line in a cloud of steam. The result was a world record of 127.66 miles per hour. 18 miles per hour faster than wheels ever had traveled the distance. The record was not better on sand or 22 years until 1928. After nearly a century, it remains on the books for cars with less than 30 horsepower. Henry could only grind his teeth as his rival gathered glory. Worse was to come, for the hot-headed Frenchman's temper had caught him a lasting place in auto race history. His racer, the big Dracru, was turned over to his mechanic, Victor Demoguiot. On January 29, 1906, 3 days after Rocket's fantastic 1-mile run, the Dracru outsped the steamer by a split second over 2 miles. Victor Demoguiot, unheard of a few days before, suddenly held the world record, averaging 122.3 miles per hour. He had become the first man to go faster than a mile. Minute for two miles. He had won his chance because a countryman had blown his temper and his exhaust stacks. Chapter 7. That's the ticket. Clothes make the man. Police in Findlay, Ohio had no respects in the 1984 kidnapping of a member of the force. Officer Fred, a mannequin, was taken from the police car. He had been with the department for 2 years. Dressed in a uniform, a life-size dummy was used to slow down speeding motorists. He was a good officer, said Mayor Keith Ronmick. I know I slowed down whenever I saw him. A doozy of a snoozy. A New Jersey traffic policeman was caught sleeping in his patrol car in 1984. He hired a lawyer and an expert witness. A hyponesist to defend him. The policeman testified the hypnotist was lulled into a trance by passing traffic. The trance is called highway hypnosis, said the lawyer. The explanation didn't catch the court napping. The verdict, 4 months suspension without pay. Boy, did he get a wrong number. To pay a traffic fine, an 87-year-old man in Columbus, Ohio, mailed the police a check for $2,131.18. In 1983, after getting a ticket, he had looked on the back to see how much he owed. He thought the amount a little steep, but he couldn't find it. The number wasn't the amount he owed, but the section of the city code he violated. 2131.18. Authorities tore up his check after he paid the proper sum, $25. Once in a lifetime, Louis Booth of Poughkeepsie, New York, didn't put a coin in the parking meter in 1947. The judge, however, ruled him innocent. The meter had been set up after Booth had parked his car. Nothing succeeds like succession. In Littleton, Colorado, in 1982, a judge threw out a minor traffic charge against Prince Bindola because the prince was 57th in line to succeed King Vlad of Saudi Arabia. Fair is fair. Officer Richard Baker of Hampton, Ohio, accidentally crashed in his patrol car into another vehicle in 1971. For not yielding the right-of-way, he wrote himself a ticket. Computers Anonymous. Police of Smethwick, England, had to take their new breath test machine off duty in 1977. It became drunk. The machine test driver suspected of drunkenness by delivering an instant computer readout of blood alcohol levels. The machine was supposed to replace the old plastic bag, which merely turned green if the alcohol content in the breath was too high. The mini computer got tipsy. It began to give readings high enough to indicate that drivers had more alcohol in them than blood. Too heavy a dose of alcohol, like fumes, had done it in. It couldn't take all the alcohol, and we had to remove it, said the Chief Inspector Patrick Wallace. We sent it to the Home Office to get dried out. A moving story. In Madison, Wisconsin, 2 police officers questioned the use of radar to catch speeders. Anthony Girona Jr. and Richard Darley went before the city's police advisory committee in 1980 to air their protestants. The air had become doubters, following tests by a radar unit. A parked car was clocked at 12 miles per hour and a junkyard at 29 miles per hour. No one loves a traffic light. In 1986, William P. Endo 9 was riding with his mother in New York City when they were caught in a traffic jam. There were only about a dozen horses and carriages involved, but no one knew exactly what to do. It took half an hour to untangle the mess. Young William never forgot the experience. For the rest of his life, he devoted himself to solving traffic problems. When he died in 1945, he was recognized as the leading international authority on the subject. In 1903, New York City police began using First Traffic Control Manual, Endo's Rules of Driving. Many of his rules are still followed today, such as slow-moving traffic must keep near to the right curb. A vehicle that overtakes another must pass on the left. A stop A stop is signaled